She spoke fluent Russian before the Mafia boss minutes later. He ordered bring her to my office. The winter in Harbor Light, Massachusetts, was a special kind of cruel. It was not the clean, silent snow of postcards, but a bitter, wet cold that seeped into the bones. Sleet ticked against the reinforced windows of the Crown Tide Private Club, a sound drowned out by the manufactured warmth and low thrum of conversation inside. The club sat perched on the old wharf, a fortress of reclaimed brick and smoked glass accessible only to the kind of wealth that did not advertise itself. Tonight, it was Eastern European wealth. Import-export businessmen with steel watches and silent bodyguards, men who preferred their vodka chilled and their privacy absolute. Maya Ellison felt the chill despite the heavy wool blazer of her uniform. She was running on 5 hours of sleep and the dregs of lukewarm coffee. Her feet ached inside her sensible black shoes. This was supposed to be her night off. But her stepmother's latest hospital bill was sitting on her cramped kitchen counter, highlighted in aggressive pink, and her landlord had made it clear that Monday was the absolute deadline for the rent. So, she had taken the extra shift, a double, covering for a girl who had wisely called in sick, a bachelor's degree in linguistics, specializing in Russian and Eastern European studies, had qualified her for precisely this serving exorbitantly priced alcohol to men who likely owned the very shipping lanes she had written her thesis on. Ellison Mark, the floor manager, hissed, his face pinched with stress. He grabbed her by the elbow, pulling her away from the main bar. "Forget Station 4. I need you upstairs. Second floor, private dining. Now." He propelled her toward the sound-buffered elevator. "Listen to me," he said, jabbing a finger close to her face. "These are not the usual tech billionaires. These are extremely important guests from the Baltic. You keep your head down, you pour, and you speak English only. Do you understand me? Don't try to be clever, don't try to show off. Just English." "I understand," Maya said, her voice tight. The desperation for a good tip, a cash tip that could go straight into the rent envelope, overrode her annoyance. "Good, they're agitated. Just get them this." He shoved a heavy silver tray at her, laden with a crystal decanter and 6 small glasses. "And get out!" The elevator doors opened onto a silent, carpeted hallway. Only one set of doors at the end was occupied. 2 guards, built like refrigerators and wearing identical dark suits, stood flanking the entrance. They didn't look at her, but she felt their eyes scan every inch of her as she approached. One of them opened the door just wide enough for her to slip through. The room was thick with smoke and the sharp, angry cadence of the Russian language. The frosted glass door had muffled it. But in here, the argument was peaking. "The entire shipment through the North Atlantic route," a harsh voice snapped. "It doesn't matter," another voice cut back, deeper, calmer, but laced with iron. "An informant sold us out. The Bureau of Transnational Integrity has the manifest. The Americans will blow everything open before it even reaches the dock." Maya froze for a microsecond. The language was fluent, rapid. But more than that, the topic, the BTI shipping routes, set her nerves on edge. These were not casual complaints. She forced her feet to move, approaching the massive mahogany table. The men, about 8 of them, all looked up, their faces hard. The argument had stopped mid-sentence. The silence was heavy, hostile. They were waiting. She was just the help, an interruption. She began to pour the vodka, her hands steady despite the sudden tension in her shoulders. The man at the head of the table watched her. He was different from the others. He wore no visible gold, just a dark, impeccably tailored suit that seemed to absorb the light in the room. His hair was dark, his features stark, and his eyes were a shade of gray-blue, so pale they seemed almost silver, and utterly cold. He held his posture with the innate, relaxed authority of a man who had never had to raise his voice to be obeyed. The man who had been shouting slammed his hand on the table, making the glasses jump. "We move it tonight. We divert to the backup channel. I don't care what the Americans—" He trailed off, glaring at Maya. She felt the weight of their collective impatience. They wanted her gone, in an instinctive, stupid attempt to smooth the friction, to be a good hostess and perhaps secure that tip. She murmured the words without thinking. Prosciu proshchinia, she said softly. I beg your pardon, it was not just that she spoke. It was how she spoke. The pronunciation was flawless. The soft palatals, the precise vowel reduction, it was not the clumsy attempt of a student. It was the clean, educated accent of St. Petersburg. Every man at the table went still. The air vacuumed out of the room. The man who had been shouting stared at her, his mouth slightly open. Even the bodyguards by the wall seemed to tense. All of them, every single one, turned their gaze to the man at the head of the table. Konstantin Rurik did not move. He simply lifted his cold, gray-blue eyes and pinned Maya to the spot. The silence stretched, becoming agonizing. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet. The English, perfect, carrying a faint, unplaceable accent. Where did you study? Maya's blood ran cold. She realized what she had done. Mark's warning, don't be clever, screamed in her head. I went to college in Providence, sir. Are you American-born? He asked. His gaze was not just looking at her. It was assessing her, cataloging her. Yes, my grandmother... Why? He interrupted, his voice still level. Is your pronunciation so clean? He was not asking a casual question. He was dissecting her. As he spoke, he made a small, fluid gesture with his left hand, a simple flick of his fingers toward the door. One of his bodyguards immediately moved, and Maya heard the heavy, definitive click of the lock. She was sealed in. The muted sounds of the club, the distant music, the life outside this room, it was all gone. It was just her and these men and the smell of expensive vodka and danger. Konstantin Rurik watched her for another 3 seconds. It felt like an hour. He saw the flicker of panic in her eyes, the way her knuckles had gone white on the silver tray. He had seen that look before, but never on a waitress. He looked away from her, toward the guard who had locked the door. His voice was flat, devoid of any emotion. A simple executive command. Bring her to my office overlooking the bay. The order settled over the room. The other men understood immediately. This was no longer about service. This was security. This was an interrogation. And Maya Ellison, who had just been worried about Monday's rent, understood that her life had just fractured in two. The heavy door of the private dining room clicked open. The guard, the one who had locked it, gestured with his chin. This way. Maya still held the silver tray. Her hands were numb, the crystal glasses rattling faintly. She was walked, not dragged, down the silent, opulent hallway. The guard's hand rested lightly on her lower back, a gesture that was not violent but promised absolute compliance. Her mind raced, trying to find purchase. The BTI North Atlantic routes, she had just served drinks. She had just tried to earn her rent. They did not take the elevator. The guard guided her up a private glass staircase to a floor she hadn't known existed. It was silent up here. The floors dark wood, the air smelling faintly of leather and the cold sea. He stopped her outside a set of double doors carved from wood so dark it looked black. He knocked once, then opened the door and nudged her inside. The room was a temporary office, but it had the permanence of established power. One entire wall was pure glass, offering a staggering, uninterrupted view of Harbor Light Bay. The sleet lashed against the window, but the room was perfectly silent. The furniture was minimal, expensive and dark. Antique Russian paintings of naval battles hung on the walls. There was no corporate branding, no sign of a legitimate business, save for a small, discreet brass plaque on the desk that read Baltic Meridian Group. Konstantin Rurik was already there, standing by the glass, looking down at the dark, churning water of the port. He had removed his suit jacket. He wore a crisp white shirt and dark trousers, his posture relaxed but radiating a coiled energy. He turned as the door clicked shut, the guard remaining outside. "The meeting you interrupted, Miss Ellison," he began, his voice calm, "was discussing matters that require absolute discretion. And you," he walked slowly toward the desk, "did not just apologize. You demonstrated an understanding of Russian at a level reserved for negotiation, not hospitality." He sat, not in the large executive chair, but on the edge of his desk, bringing him closer to her level, yet still dominant. He swiveled a laptop on the desk to face her. It was her employee file from the Crown Tide. Maya Ellison, 26 years old, bachelor's in linguistics from Providence. His eyes lifted from the screen to her face. Thesis, Semantic Voids in Russo-American Port Negotiations. An interesting choice. Maya felt the blood drain from her face. That was not in her HR file. You applied for an internship, he continued, his voice a level monotone. With the Domestic Port Intelligence Unit, you were declined, lack of connections. It was an accident, Maya whispered, the tray suddenly feeling impossibly heavy. What I heard, I didn't understand it. Not really. They were angry. I just wanted to smooth things over. I was just hoping for a better tip. It was the truth. Pathetic as it sounded. He watched her, his gray-blue eyes unblinking. He seemed to be weighing every word, every micro-expression. A better tip, he repeated. He tilted his head, a gesture of mild curiosity, then tapped a key on his laptop. The employee file vanished, replaced by a different document. Maya's breath hitched. It was a PDF scan of her stepmother's hospital bill from Harbor Light General, the outstanding amount. The one highlighted in panicked pink ink on her own kitchen counter was displayed in sharp black figures. He had not just pulled her file from the club. In the 10 minutes it had taken her to walk up the stairs, he had dug into her life. He knew her weakness. Harbor Light has an information leak. Miss Ellison, he said, his voice dropping, becoming colder. Someone is feeding manifests and shipping schedules to the outside. Now, you appear. A linguistics expert with perfect Russian, an interest in port negotiations, and a rejected application to a federal intelligence unit. And he glanced at the bill on the screen. You are in significant debt. He leaned forward slightly. The movement was predatory. Has the BTI or the DPIU had any contact with you recently? The question hung in the silent room. It was not an accusation. It was a final test. The unspoken threat was absolute. If she was a plant, if she lied, she would not walk out of this room. She would simply vanish from the Harbor Light docks. Fear gave way to a spike of desperate, clarifying anger. Contact me. Her voice was stronger now, sharp with the injustice of it. Look at me. She nodded toward her polyester uniform. The sensible shoes. If an agency like that had recruited me, if I had any connections, do you really think I would be working the night shift at the Crown and Tide for cash tips? She met his gaze. I'm here because I'm desperate, not because I'm a spy. If they'd hired me, I wouldn't need this job. A long silence followed. Constantine studied her, his expression unreadable. He seemed to be translating her logic. Checking it against the facts he possessed, he saw the genuine panic, the absence of guile, the raw truth of her desperation. It was a defense he believed, mostly, perhaps 70%. The tension in his shoulders eased, just barely. He pushed himself off the desk and walked to a polished samovar in the corner, its silver surface gleaming. Tea. He poured 2 glasses of steaming, dark liquid without waiting for her answer. An American, born and raised, who speaks flawless Petersburg Russian and is desperate for money, he mused, as if speaking to himself. You are either a very expensive liability or a very rare opportunity. He placed one of the glasses in her hand. Her fingers brushed his. His skin was warm. I have a preference for turning liabilities into assets. He took a sip from his own glass, watching her over the rim. I have an opening. Miss Ellison, a closed position. You would work as my personal secretary and interpreter. You would be available to me 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. He named a salary that was so large, Maya thought she had misheard him. It was more than she made in a year. You would be housed in the seafront residences. It is a secure building that I control. She was reeling, trying to process the shift from interrogation to job offer. It was a gilded cage, presented as a rescue. He saw the hesitation, the calculation in her eyes, freedom versus survival. He walked back to the laptop and tapped the screen, bringing the image of the hospital bill back into sharp focus. And, Konstantin Rurik said, his voice quiet but final, I will settle your stepmother's hospital accounts tonight. Maya did not have to say yes. The decision had been made for her the moment Konstantin Rurik named his terms. The tall guard, the one who had locked her in the dining room, re-entered the office. His name, she saw, was Lev. Stitched discreetly onto the ballistic vest he wore under his suit jacket, he did not look at her, only at his boss. Konstantin gave a single, sharp nod. "We are leaving," Lev said. His voice was a low rumble, his English thick. "My things," Maya stammered, her hand still holding the warm tea glass. "My coat, my purse is in the staff locker. They will be collected," Lev stated, "or they will be replaced. It does not matter." He took the glass from her numb fingers and placed it on the desk. He put a heavy hand on her lower back, a gesture that was not violent but offered no possibility of resistance. He guided her not to the main elevators, but back down the private glass staircase. They emerged into a service corridor she had never seen, one that led directly to a steel side door. Outside. The sleet was falling harder, stinging her face. She saw Mark, the floor manager, hovering near the exit, his face pale and drawn. He was wringing his hands. "Mark, I don't understand," Maya began, a desperate plea for normalcy. Mark flinched, refusing to meet her eyes. "Mister, Rurik has bought out your employment contract, Miss Ellison," he recited, his voice strained and thin. "Your shift is covered. All your personal items will be forwarded. Good night." He turned and almost ran back into the warmth of the club, terrified of being caught in the orbit of her sudden, strange departure. She was no longer staff. She was cargo. Lev opened the back door of a black SUV that sat idling at the curb, its engine a silent, powerful thrum against the noise of the storm. She slid inside. The interior was plush leather and smelled new. The heavy, armored door thudded shut, sealing off the world, sealing off her old life. The 2 hours she had spent worrying about rent and tips felt like they had happened a lifetime ago, to someone else. The drive was short, less than 5 minutes, pulling away from the historic wharf and toward the newest, most aggressive building on the Harbor Light skyline, the seafront residences. It was a tower of glass and steel that Maya had only ever seen from the city bus. Lev led her through a private, heated garage to an elevator that opened directly into the apartment's foyer. The security was silent, digital, and absolute. He handed her a thin black key card. "Mr. Rurik's car will be here at 7:30 in the morning. Do not be late." He did not wait for a reply. The elevator doors slid shut, leaving her in complete, echoing silence. The apartment was stunning. It was also cold, sterile, and vast. The kitchen was outfitted with gleaming Italian appliances she would be afraid to touch. The bathroom was a cavern of dark gray marble. The main room was dominated by a single wall of glass that offered the same view as Konstantin's office, the entire churning, black expanse of the bay, the city lights glittering below like a net. She walked, hesitant, into the bedroom. A king-sized bed was perfectly made. The walk-in closet was open, and it was not empty. Hanging pristine in garment bags were 3 complete outfits: a severe, elegant dark gray pantsuit, a navy blue sheath dress, and a cream silk blouse with a black pencil skirt. They looked to be exactly her size. A chill, sharper than the harbor wind, ran down her spine. This was not an impulse. He had not discovered her tonight. He, or his organization, had been looking. They had prepared this apartment for an asset, for a Russian-speaking American translator. She had just been the one to walk, foolishly, into the audition. On the bed, a simple, heavy black box. She lifted the lid. Inside, nestled in black tissue paper, was a dark silk dress, the color of the midnight sea, and a matching, whisper-thin robe. On top lay a single card, thick as cardboard. The handwriting was sharp, angled, and impatient. "Tomorrow, 7:30 a.m., we will discuss the real work." Her phone, still in the pocket of her cheap uniform blazer, vibrated. The sound was offensively loud in the pristine quiet. It was a text message, not from a number, but from an alert system, Harbor Light General Hospital. Notification: the outstanding balance for patient stepmother's name has been paid in full by the North Sea Fund. Her account is clear. Thank you. Maya sank onto the edge of the bed, the silk robe cool and alien beneath her trembling fingers. It was done. The pink highlighted bill on her counter was now just a piece of paper. Her stepmother was safe. A wave of profound, suffocating gratitude washed over her, so strong it made her dizzy. It was followed immediately by a wave of icy, paralyzing dread. The transaction was complete. She had been bought and paid for in the span of 2 hours. Her fingers dialed the only number she knew by heart. Jada picked up on the third ring. "Maya, what's up? You sound weird. Did Mark give you trouble about the shift?" Jada's voice was warm, real, a relic from the life that had just been amputated. "Jada, I quit. I quit the club." "You what tonight?" "Just like that, did you get the rent?" "I got a new job," Maya said, the words feeling strange on her tongue. "It's corporate, a translation gig. They're paying a lot." "Jada, and they gave me a place to live. At the seafront." Silence. A long, dead silence on the other end of the line. "Maya," Jada said finally, her voice low and serious. "Who is they?" "My new boss. He's from the Baltic." "The seafront residence, Maya. That's cartel money. That's Russian mob money. What did you do?" I spoke Russian," Maya whispered, tears welling in her eyes, hot and angry. "He overheard me. Jada, he paid Mom's hospital bills. He paid all of them tonight." Jada cursed, a long, soft sound. "Listen to me. Men like that, men who give you an apartment in that building and pay your family's debts on the first night, they don't do it because they need you to type. That's not a job, Maya. That's a leash. You be so careful. You get out if you can." "I can't," Maya said, looking at the city lights, so far below. "I think I'm already in." She hung up, promising to call soon, a promise that already felt like a lie. The silence of the apartment descended again, no longer luxurious but suffocating. She looked at the gift box, at the dark silk. She showered in the marble cage, the water pressure alone a display of casual, excessive wealth. But that night, she did not wear the silk. She pulled on her own faded cotton pajama bottoms and an old t-shirt, the fabric worn and familiar. It was a small, pathetic gesture of defiance. She slept on top of the immaculate, high thread count sheets, a stranger in her new life. At 7:25 the next morning, she was in the lobby, dressed in the gray pantsuit. It fit perfectly. The terror of that perfect fit was worse than anything else. The black SUV was waiting. The tinted windows were so dark they reflected the gray morning sky like a mirror. She got in. They did not drive to the financial district. They drove deep into the working port, a place of diesel fumes, screaming gulls, and rust. They passed through a security gate in a high fence topped with razor wire, pulling up to a series of massive red brick warehouses. The sign said, Harbor Light Logistics Center. But the men patrolling the perimeter with earpieces and the set, hard faces of veterans were not logistics security. This was a fortress. A woman was waiting for her just inside the main door. The interior was a stark contrast to the rough exterior, a gleaming, high-tech command center with glass-walled offices and dozens of people monitoring screens. The woman was tall, impossibly chic in a black sheath dress, her dark hair pulled into a bun so tight it looked painful. She was perhaps in her 40s, and her eyes were as sharp as Constantine's, but held a restless, severe energy. "You are Maya Ellison," the woman stated. Her English was precise, carrying a clipped Moscow accent. "Yes, and you are—" "I am Sarah Volkov. I am the dispatch director." Her smile was brief and held no warmth. "I handle Mr. Rurik's scheduling, his operations, and his assets. When he is unavailable, you will report to me." Sarah was the chief of staff, the gatekeeper. And, Maya understood instantly, the second set of eyes. Sarah led her to a small, glass-walled office. "Mr. Rurik has placed a great deal of faith in you, very quickly," Sarah said, her tone light, but her eyes hard. "He's not often impulsive. I will be watching, Miss Ellison, to see how loyal you are. We do not tolerate misunderstandings here." Sarah Volkov did not give Maya time to acclimate. There was no orientation, no human resources paperwork. Her office was a glass cube with a powerful computer, a secure phone, and a view of the logistics floor, where massive containers were being processed by men in hard hats. "This is your first test, Miss Ellison," Sarah said, placing a stack of paper binders on her desk. The binders were thick, at least 3 of them, and filled with dense Russian text. "These are the manifests and correspondence for our shipping routes from Arkhangelsk to Harbor Light, routed through Iceland, Mr. Rurik believes there are discrepancies. You are to review all of it and find any irregularities in the container code changes." Sarah's smile was thin. "He will know if you miss something. I will know." She left Maya alone in the glass box. The message was clear. This was not a job. It was a trial. Fail. And she was out. Or worse. Maya opened the first binder. The work was dry, technical, and exactly what her thesis had covered. It was manifests, bills of lading, and internal emails, all in highly specific, technical Russian. She cross-referenced the container codes from the departure manifests in Arkhangelsk with the arrival logs in Iceland and the projected arrivals in Harbor Light. For 2 hours, she worked, her mind sinking into the familiar comfort of the language, the puzzle of it. She found 2 instances of code changes, but they were minor, likely clerical errors. This was too simple. Sarah was not testing her for clerical skills. She went deeper, shifting from the manifests to the email correspondence. She was looking for patterns. The emails were mostly terse discussions of weather delays and fuel costs, but then she found a thread, buried in a subfolder, that had nothing to do with container codes. It was an internal complaint from a port manager in Arkhangelsk. He was referencing anonymous calls from an American podcaster who seemed to have inside information about their schedules. The manager was furious, demanding to know who was leaking. Maya tracked the thread. The podcaster was not named, but the agency he claimed to be getting information from was the Northeast Maritime Control Commission. Maya frowned. She had spent 4 years studying this. She had applied to the real agencies. She had never, not once, heard of a Northeast Maritime Control Commission? It did not exist. It was a fake name, a cover. Someone inside was leaking information to the media, but they were feeding the media a fake source, likely to make the leak seem official and credible. This was not a discrepancy. This was active sabotage. She compiled her findings into a single, concise report, the 2 clerical errors on 1 page, the email thread, and her analysis of the fake agency on another. She was just finishing when the door to her office opened. Konstantin Rurik entered, filling the small space with his presence. He had changed from last night, wearing a dark gray turtleneck and pressed trousers, looking more like a ruthless architect than a mob boss. He did not speak, simply held out his hand for the report. Maya gave it to him. He read the first page on the clerical errors and nodded, unimpressed. Then he turned to the second page. He read it once, then a second time. His gray-blue eyes lifted from the paper and fixed on her. The coldness was gone, replaced by a sharp, focused intensity. "You found this in 2 hours," he stated. "It was in the email correspondence, not the manifests," Maya said, her voice steady. "The name of the agency, the commission, it's not real. I would have known it." He tossed the report onto her desk. The container codes were a test. Sarah's test, this, he tapped the second page, is the real problem. "We are being bled by a rival organization on the West Coast. They are working with the mainland Criminal Finance Directorate, trying to break my routes. Someone inside Harbor Light is feeding them our schedules. This podcaster is just the noise they are using to cover their tracks." He paced the small office, his energy making the glass walls feel like they were shrinking. Maya's mind raced, connecting the dots, the linguistics, the accents, the reason he had been so focused on her pronunciation. "You're not just looking for a leak," she said, the realization landing with the weight of a stone. "You're looking for a specific kind of Russian. You have suspects, but you can't tell who is talking to who. You want me to listen to them. You want me to help you distinguish the Russian of a northern port worker from the educated Russian of someone in Moscow, to help you pinpoint the traitor." Konstantin stopped pacing and turned to her. A slow, genuine smile touched the corners of his mouth. It was a cold, dangerous expression, but it was a smile. Precisely, he said. And of course, to see if you would immediately report this conversation to the Bureau of Transnational Integrity. I told you, Maya said, her chin lifting. I'm not a spy. You are a valuable asset, he countered. I have tried to recruit from American agencies before. None of them are clean. They are all compromised, bought by one side or another. But you, he looked at her, his gaze analytical. A native-born American with your linguistic purity, you're easy to hide in plain sight, and, his voice dropped slightly, you are very easy to keep. The veiled threat hung in the air. Easy to keep, easy to control, easy to disappear. The leverage he held over her stepmother's health, was a chain. But in that moment, Maya realized she had something he needed. Her unique, specific mind. The chain now ran both ways. I have a condition, Maya said. His smile vanished. You are in no position to make demands. My stepmother. Harbor Light General is a public hospital. It's not good enough? Maya met his stare, her heart hammering but her voice pure steel. You paid the bill. Now you're going to move her. I want her at the Harbor Light Oncology Pavilion. I want her to have the best private care in the city. I want her to have a chance. Constantine stared at her, a long, calculating silence stretching between them. He was reevaluating her, seeing the desperation from last night harden into a bargain. He respected it. He pulled a phone from his pocket, hit a single number, and began speaking in rapid, authoritative Russian. He did not ask. He commanded. He named the hospital, named her stepmother, and gave a series of orders. He listened for a moment, then snapped, Now. He hung up and slid the phone back into his pocket. The pavilion's private car will transfer her within the hour, he said, as if discussing a change in a shipping schedule. She will have their top specialist. Thank you, Maya said, the words feeling dry and inadequate. Do not thank me, Miss Ellison. This is a transaction. You provide your expertise. I provide solutions. He turned to leave. Maya stood up and looked out the glass wall. Down on the logistics floor, she could see Sarah watching her office, a look of undisguised suspicion on her face. Later that afternoon, a black car with the discreet logo of the Harbor Light Oncology Pavilion pulled up to her stepmother's apartment, a world away from the port. Maya watched on her phone, via a secure link Constantine's IT department had sent her. She watched two professional medics help her stepmother, frail and confused, but wrapped in a warm blanket, into the back of the luxury vehicle. Tears streamed down Maya's face, but she made no sound. She was trading her freedom. She was trading her morals, her safety, her entire former life. But her stepmother was going to live. She would make this bargain every single day. She wiped her eyes just as Constantine's shadow fell across her desk. She had not heard him approach. The transfer is complete, he said. He looked at her, noting the faint redness in her eyes, her rigid posture. Your first day is over, he said. The car will take you back to the seafront. It will pick you up at 8. 8, my start time is 7:30. Not for the office, Constantine said, his gaze lingering on her. There is a private dinner tonight. I need to know exactly who I am investing in. Maya. The elevator was not the one from the garage. This was a private car, accessed from a discreet panel in Constantine's own office, requiring his fingerprint. It ascended silently, moving past the main floors, up to the absolute roof of the headquarters building. The doors opened onto a space that was not an office or an apartment. It was a glass cube, an enclosed deck suspended high above the port. The sleet had passed, but the wind of the looming storm howled against the thick panes, a silent, violent assault. Far below, the lights of the container cranes and the city glittered against the black, churning water of the bay. It was a breathtaking, terrifying view, and it was utterly private. This was not his home. A home was a vulnerability. This was a tactical position, chosen specifically, Maya realized, so that no one with a long-lens camera from a neighboring building could get a shot. A single table was set for two. Constantine was already there, standing by the glass, his hands clasped behind his back. He turned as she entered. The shift in his appearance was immediate and disarming. The severe, authoritative armor of his suit was gone. He wore a dark, form-fitting cashmere turtleneck and dark gray trousers. The clothes were simple, yet impossibly expensive, and they revealed the lean, hard lines of his body, the coiled power in his shoulders. He was no longer the boss of the boardroom. He was the man, and that, Maya found, was infinitely more dangerous. A server, as silent and imposing as Lev, poured her a glass of water and set down a small plate of appetizers before vanishing back into the elevator. "Please sit," Constantine said, his voice softer in this intimate space. She sat, her back rigid. He took the seat opposite her. "The work you did today," he began, "was adequate. I just cross-referenced manifests and read emails," she replied, her voice steady. "No," he corrected. "You saw the busy work Sarah left for you, and then you bypassed it to find the actual threat. There is a significant difference." He leaned back, his gaze analytical, but the suspicion from the office had faded. "I have a question. The club, you're Russian. It was not just clean, it was specific." Maya paused, surprised by the personal nature of the question. "My grandmother. She was from Latvia. She grew up speaking Russian, but with a heavy Baltic influence. I spent several years with her when I was young. Before I started my formal studies, her accent, it stayed with me." A flicker of understanding passed over his face. "Duh, that is what I heard. Not the sterile Russian of a university, but the sound of the coast. It is a rare thing to hear in Harbor Light. It is the sound of home, for many of my people." The tension had shifted. It was no longer the electric fear of an interrogation. It was the taut wire hum of something else. He was no longer assessing her as a threat. He was assessing her as a person. This, she knew, was the real investment. The manifests had been a test of her skill. This was a test of her character. She felt a sudden, reckless surge of boldness. If he could dissect her past, she could at least acknowledge her eyes drifted to his left wrist, resting on the table. A fine, pale scar network started at the cuff of his turtleneck, disappearing beneath the face of his expensive watch. "And you?" she asked, her voice quiet. "Your accent. It is not just Moscow. It is harder." He went still. The warmth that had briefly entered his eyes vanished, replaced by a shadow. He instinctively touched the scar, his thumb tracing its edge. "Murmansk," he said, his voice flat and distant. "A very long winter, a long time ago. It was the winter I learned that only the strong survive, the weak. They are a lesson for others." The words were oblique, but the brutality behind them was crystal clear. She saw, in that instant, the violent, frozen past that had forged this man, the man who could pay a life-saving medical bill with a single phone call. The man who would, undoubtedly, end a life with the same detached efficiency. The power was not just in his wealth, it was in the abyss he had survived. The silent server reappeared to pour wine, a deep, dark red. As the server leaned between them, Constantine's right hand moved. He did not touch her. He placed his hand on the back of her empty chair, his fingers resting lightly on the wood. It was a subtle, proprietary gesture, a perimeter, a claim on the space she occupied. His gaze on her had changed. It was no longer questioning, it was possessing. She felt the heat of his presence, a magnetic pull that terrified her. It was not just gratitude for her stepmother's safety, though that was a powerful anchor. It was the dizzying, terrifying sensation of being truly seen by a man who saw everything. A man this dangerous, this controlled, this broken. Jada's warning echoed in her head. That's not a job. Maya, that's a leash. She had to reinforce the boundary, if only for her own sanity. "Mr. Rurik," she said, her voice formal, "I'm deeply grateful for what you have done for my stepmother. I will work hard to repay that debt. I am your employee." He looked at her for a long moment. A slow smile touched the corner of his mouth, but it did not reach his eyes. "My employees lie to me. Maya, they lie to Sarah. They lie to themselves. They tell me what they think I want to hear. They maneuver for position. They are all, in their own way, weak. He leaned forward, the small table between them vanishing. His voice dropped to a low, intense murmur that vibrated through her. Tonight, in my office, you were the only person in this entire city who did not lie to me. You told me the truth about your desperation. You found the truth in those manifests. And you had the strength to make a demand in return. He stared at her, his gray-blue eyes pinning her to the chair. I value that truth, that loyalty, more than any contract. The rest of the meal was a blur. He asked her about her studies, her thesis, her opinions on the port's inefficiencies. He was mapping her mind, testing its boundaries, and she found herself answering with an honesty that was both liberating and frightening. When it was over, he stood as she stood. The server had long since disappeared. They were alone in the glass box, suspended over the dark, windy city. She braced herself, expecting him to move closer, to use this intimacy, this power, to try and kiss her. He did not. He simply stood there, watching her. As she turned to the elevator, he said her name. Maya. She stopped and turned back. He stepped forward but stopped just outside her personal space. He reached out and took her right hand. He did not shake it. He simply held it. His palm was warm, calloused, his grip firm and sure. He held it for 1 second, 2, 3, long past the point of a polite gesture. His thumb brushed once over her pulse point. He was reading her. Again. He released her hand, but his gaze held her fast. The warning was back in his eyes, but it was different now. It was tangled with something else, something reluctant. You are a valuable asset, he said, his voice low. I'm beginning to believe in you. He let the words hang in the air, a promise and a threat. Do not disappear just when I am starting to believe. The next morning, the local Harbor Light news feed was on every screen in the logistics center. An anonymous tip, submitted overnight to the Special Maritime Inspection Unit, had led to a pre-dawn raid on a container at the wharf. The cameras showed federal-looking agents, but their uniforms were slightly wrong, the insignia unfamiliar. They opened the container to find it empty. But Maya, watching from her glass-walled office, felt her blood run cold. The time of the raid, as reported by the news anchor, was exactly the moment Constantine's legitimate, non-problematic shipment had been scheduled to arrive at that exact berth. The raiders had missed the real cargo, but the message was clear. Someone inside had sent the coordinates. Someone was testing the defenses. Constantine's response was absolute silence. He walked onto the main logistics floor, his presence sucking the air out of the massive space. His face was calm, but his gray-blue eyes were lethal, sharp as knives. He gestured to Maya. My office, now. He did not mean the glass cube. He meant his inner sanctum, the one with the private elevator. He sat her not at a desk, but in a chair against the wall. Sarah is bringing in the senior team. The meeting will be in Russian. The intercom to this room will be live. You want me to listen? Maya said. I want you to identify. He corrected. You will listen to every word, every accent, every hesitation. You will tell me who is lying. He left, and the room was filled with the amplified sound of the argument next door. Constantine's voice was a low, dangerous rumble, demanding answers. The others were frantic, defensive, their Russian a mix of regional accents. And then Sarah Volkov spoke. Her voice cut through the panic, clear and precise. She was delivering a status report, her Moscow Russian perfect, every syllable clean, every stress correct. She was the picture of control, the loyal chief of staff managing a crisis for her boss. But she made a mistake. It was tiny, a single word. When describing the anonymous tip, she used a term for informant that was technically correct but slightly archaic, a word a native Russian would use, but she paired it with an Americanized grammatical structure. It was the specific, subtle error of someone who has lived in the United States for so long they have begun, unconsciously, to blend the two linguistic systems. A chill traced its way down Maya's spine. Sarah, who was always so precise, would never make that error. Not in front of Constantine. Not unless. Maya realized the truth. Sarah had not made a mistake. She had left a clue. She had intentionally spoken in a way that she knew Maya, the other high-level Russian speaker, would recognize as flawed. The intercom clicked off. The door opened. Constantine stood there, his face a mask of cold fury. "Well, it's Sarah," Maya said, her voice barely a whisper. "But it's not just that. She made an error, a small one, a grammatical slip that a native living in the U.S. for a long time might make. It was too clean. She wanted me to hear it. She wanted to be heard." Constantine's eyes narrowed as he processed the implication. "Constantine," Maya said, standing up, her hands trembling. "She knows about me. You and I are the only two people who know the specifics of my linguistic skill. This isn't just a leak. She's setting a trap. She's framing me for it. She's using me as the distraction." He stared at her, seeing the genuine terror in her eyes, and he knew, with chilling certainty, that she was right. That night, the storm that had been threatening finally broke over Harbor Light. The wind shrieked against the glass walls of her apartment, the sound of a living thing trying to get in. There was a hard, sharp knock on her door, not the polite buzz from the lobby, a direct knock. She looked through the peephole. It was Constantine. He was alone. No Lev, no bodyguards. She unfastened the deadbolt and opened the door. The wind from the hallway, pulled by the vacuum of the vast apartment, ripped into the room, sending papers flying off a table. It whipped her hair across her face, cold and damp with the smell of the angry sea. Constantine stood there, his black suit jacket soaked, his hair plastered to his forehead. He looked at her, his face a mask of cold, controlled rage. He stepped inside, pushing against the wind, and kicked the heavy door shut with his heel. The thud was definitive, sealing them in. He did not stop. He advanced on her, crowding her, backing her up against the foyer wall. He was so close she could feel the icy dampness radiating from his clothes, see the flecks of gray in his blue eyes. He planted his hands on the wall on either side of her head, caging her in. He was checking her, his gaze sweeping her face, looking for a reaction. He was trying to see if she was trembling from the cold, from the day's events, or from him. "They will come for you," he said, his voice a low, rough growl, barely audible over the screaming wind. "Sarah has made her move. She will point them here. If you want to live, you do not leave my side." The fear was a living thing in her throat, choking her. But as she looked at him, so close, so dangerous, she realized the trembling in her limbs was not just terror. It was him. It was the pent-up energy from the night before, the hand on her chair, the long look, the possessive grip on her hand. It was the terrifying, undeniable pull she felt toward this man. "I'm scared," she whispered, her voice ragged, her breath fogging in the small space between them. "They will not touch you," he stated, a vow. "No," she breathed, her eyes locked on his. "You don't understand. I'm not scared of them. I'm scared that I'm starting to like you." The confession hung in the air, raw and irrevocable. The fury in his eyes faltered, replaced by a dark, sudden blaze. His right hand moved from the wall. He did not grab her. He placed his palm against her cheek, his fingers lacing into her hair. His skin was cold from the rain, but his touch was electric. His thumb stroked. Once, along the sharp line of her jaw. His gaze dropped from her eyes to her mouth. It was a silent, direct question, a request for permission that his posture did not need, but his eyes asked for. Maya did not move. She did not breathe. She gave her answer by simply existing in that moment, by not pulling away. He leaned in slowly, giving her every chance to retreat, and then his lips met hers. It was not a gentle kiss. It was a claiming. It was cold from the rain, and hard with the tension of the day, and desperate. He pulled her body flush against his other hand sliding from the wall to her back, splaying wide and low, pressing her against the unyielding wall of his chest. She could feel the hard muscle beneath the damp, expensive suit, the steady, powerful beat of his heart against her own frantic rhythm. It was a shock. The solid warmth of him against the cold, the sheer, controlled strength in his hands. Her hands came up, gripping his suit jacket, holding on as the world tilted. He angled his head, the kiss deepening, becoming possessive. A silent, furious language that spoke of ownership and protection, and a hunger he had clearly held in check for too long. He whispered something against her mouth, a low, rough sound, his breath warm. Somnoi, Naboya. With me. Don't be afraid. The Russian words, a command and a comfort, broke the last of her resistance. She melted against him, her body answering his, her fear consumed by a wave of heat and a desperate, reckless need. He broke the kiss first. It was a wrenching, ragged separation. He did not step back. He rested his forehead against hers, their breath mingling, harsh and fast. His eyes were closed, his jaw tight. "I will not," he breathed, his voice rough. "Have you thinking you are just the gift in the silk box? I will not have you as a payment for a debt." He pulled back just enough to look at her, his hands still framing her face, his thumbs stroking her temples. "When this is done," he said, his voice a raw promise, "we will talk. This will be finished." She understood. This was not an assault. This was not an employer taking what he had paid for. This was a choice. And in the middle of a storm, in a glass tower, surrounded by unseen enemies, they had both, irrevocably, just made it. The kiss had changed nothing and everything. The storm outside had passed, but the one inside the walls of the logistics center was just gathering force. When Maya arrived the next morning after Constantine had left her apartment in the pre-dawn hours with a final, hard look she could not decipher, he was all business. "Sarah is moving faster than I anticipated," he said, his voice clipped and cold, as if the night before had never happened. He slid a tablet across his main desk. On the screen was a photo of a man in his late 20s, earnest and slightly unkempt, speaking into a microphone. "You know this man." It was Eli Ward, her ex-boyfriend from college. The man she had almost moved to New York with before her stepmother's first diagnosis had chained her to Harbor Light. "He runs a local podcast, Harbor Light Below Deck," she said, her voice hollow. "He's also the podcaster you identified from the Arkhangelsk emails." Constantine said, "Sarah has been feeding him information. Small leaks designed to look like a brave whistleblower is talking to him. Now, she's escalating. I need to know what he knows. I need to know what she promised him and who he thinks he's talking to." "You want me to talk to him?" she stated. It was not a question. "Yes, this is your first dirty assignment, as you might call it. He trusts you, or at least he will meet with you, find out everything, his sources, his contacts, what he plans to do next. And if I say no, your stepmother's new treatment protocol is excellent," Constantine replied, his eyes flat and cold. "It would be a shame to interrupt it. The car is waiting." The bar was called the Rusted Anchor, a cavernous, cold warehouse on the bad side of the port, smelling of stale beer and low tide. Eli was already there, hunched over a beer at a scarred wooden table in the back. He looked up as she approached, his expression a mixture of resentment and curiosity. "Maya," he said, not bothering to stand. "Wow, you clean up. That suit costs more than my last 3 months' rent. Heard you got a new job. Guess it pays better than the Crown and Tide." "Eli, thanks for coming," she said, sliding into the booth. "I almost didn't," he said, taking a long drink. "After you ghosted me for, what was it, taking care of your mom. And now you're working for the very people I'm investigating. It's a bad look, Maya." "It's complicated, Eli. It's always complicated with you." He shot back. He sighed, the anger draining out of him, replaced by the familiar, frantic energy of his journalist persona. "Look, I'm glad you called. You need to be careful. You're in deep, way deeper than you know." "What do you mean?" He leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "My source. The one inside the port giving me the manifests. He just died. They found him in the water off Pier 4 this morning. Cops are calling it a suspicious drowning, which is cop speak for murder." Maya's blood ran cold. She understood instantly. This was Sarah's move. It was brilliant and brutal. Sarah had killed the low-level source she had been using, knowing Eli would immediately assume his new target. Konstantin Rurik was the killer. Sarah was not just leaking information, she was directing a narrative, painting Konstantin as a murderer to light a fire under Eli and the media. Eli, "You don't know who did that," Maya said, trying to keep her voice even. "Oh, come on. Maya, I'm sniffing around the new Russian shadow owner of the port, and my source gets drowned. You're smart. Connect the dots." He looked at her, his eyes narrowed with sudden, dawning suspicion. "Or are you here to warn me off? Is that it? Did he send you? He doesn't know I'm here." "Like this." She lied, navigating the razor's edge. "I'm his translator, Eli. I see paperwork. I hear things. And I'm scared. I'm scared for you." "What things?" he pressed. "Is it true?" "The whispers I'm hearing is your guy, this Rurik. Is he involved in human trafficking? Because that's the next story. Maya, that's what my source was about to give me." The question hit her like a physical blow. She had to walk the tightrope. If she said yes, Eli would go straight to the real FBI, and an inferno would erupt that she and Konstantin could not control. If she said no too convincingly, he might suspect she was a pawn and dig in harder, or worse, mention her name to one of his contacts. "No," she said, putting genuine fear into her voice. "It's not that. It's financial. Sanctions, rival companies. It's ugly, and it's dangerous, but it's not that. Eli, if you go on your show and accuse him of that, with no proof, he will destroy you, legally. He'll bury your podcast, your reputation, everything." She watched him process this. He was disappointed. A financial crime story was less sexy than human trafficking. She had given him an answer that was plausible, deflating, and most importantly, steered him away from the most volatile accusation. "What about your contacts?" she pushed gently. The agency people you've spoken to?" "I can't tell you that," he said defensively. "But they're big. Federal. They're watching him. They're the ones who told me to look into the trafficking angle." He meant the fake agencies, Sarah's invention. "Just be careful," Maya said, sliding out of the booth. "Don't trust them. Eli, they're not who you think they are." She left him sitting there, confused and angry, and got back in the waiting SUV. She felt disgusting, as if she needed to scrub her skin. She had just used their entire shared history to manipulate him. That night, she was back in her glass cage at the seafront. Konstantin was across the city, in a meeting she was not allowed to attend. She was supposed to be reviewing transcripts, but she could not focus. Her phone buzzed. It was a video call. "Her stepmother," Maya answered, forcing a bright smile. "Hey, how are you feeling?" Her stepmother's face filled the screen. She was sitting up in a plush hospital bed, the sterile white of Harbor Light General replaced by soft, warm lighting. Her eyes were red, but for the first time in a year, she was weeping with joy. "Maya, the Dr. Aris, he just left," she cried, her voice thick. He said there's a new targeted therapy, a trial. He said my insurance would never have covered it, but the fund, your fund, they approved it. This morning, he said this could add years. Maya, years." Maya watched the woman who had raised her sob with a relief that was so profound, it was painful. This was the result. This was the payment for the lie she had just told Eli. This was the physical, tangible, life-saving proof of her bargain. The guilt from the bar did not vanish, but it was eclipsed by a fierce, protective certainty. She had made the right choice. She would make it again. The door to the apartment opened. She hadn't even heard the elevator. Sarah Volkov stood in the foyer, dressed in a sharp black coat, a thin, cold smile on her face. Maya quickly ended the call. "Such a touching reunion," Sarah said, her Moscow accent clipping the words. "Your boss is very generous with his assets." "What are you doing here?" Maya asked, standing. Sarah strolled into the living room, trailing her fingers over the back of the sofa. "I just wanted to see how you were settling in, and to see how your Reunion. Went today. With your old friend, the podcaster. Maya's heart hammered. I don't know what you're talking about. Oh, please. Maya, we are both professionals. Mr. Rurik has eyes on you. I have eyes on Mr. Rurik. Sarah's smile widened. You did good work. Confusing the local press is always smart. I'm sure your friends at the Coastal Economic Crime Investigation Bureau would be very interested in your talent for misdirection. Another fake agency. Sarah was letting her know. I see you. I know what you're doing, and I can point the finger at you whenever I want. The moment Sarah left, Maya called Constantine. He picked up on the first ring. She relayed every single word of both conversations, the drowned source, Eli's trafficking question, and, most importantly, Sarah's visit, her words, and the name of the new fake agency. There was a long silence on Constantine's end. When he finally spoke, his voice was dangerously quiet, the sound of a predator that has finally, definitively identified its prey. She's not selling us to the Americans here, he said, a note of cold revelation in his voice. She's not that stupid, the BTI, the CSIB. It's all a diversion. She's using these non-existent agencies as a smokescreen to hide who she's really selling the data to. Who? Maya whispered. A rival organization, Constantine said. The Volkova Shoreline Syndicate in New Jersey. She's not just a traitor, Maya. She's trying to start a war, and she's using you as the trigger. Ship Repair Warehouse 4 was at the dead end of the port, a cavernous tomb of rusted iron and shadows. The wind howled off the water, rattling the corrugated metal walls. It was the perfect place for a betrayal. Maya was positioned in a dark, cold foreman's office, a glass window overlooking the main floor, which was lit by a single, weak sodium lamp. She wore a simple black earpiece, the receiver live, piping in the sound from the floor below. Her job was simple: listen, identify, and do not move. Constantine was somewhere in the shadows to her left. With Lev, she could not see him, but she felt his presence. A knot of coiled tension in the darkness. Footsteps echoed on the concrete. Sarah Volkov. She walked into the pool of dim light, confident, her head high. She was expecting to meet her contact from the Bureau of Transnational Integrity, the final step in her plan to frame Constantine and deliver his assets to a new master. But the man who emerged from the opposite shadow was not a Fed. He was short, built like a fire hydrant, and wore an expensive leather jacket that screamed New York money. Not federal austerity. He was Russian, but his energy was all East Coast syndicate. You're late, Sarah snapped in Russian, her voice sharp. I'm here, aren't I? The man replied. His Russian was fluent, but the rhythm was wrong. It was the Russian of Brighton Beach, flattened by a New York accent. This was not a government agent. This was a gangster. Did you bring the payment? Sarah asked. Did you bring the schedules? He countered. They made the exchange, a data drive for a briefcase. The man opened the drive on a laptop. This is everything, the routes for the next 6 weeks. Sarah smiled, a thin, triumphant expression. It will put Volkova in control of the entire eastern seaboard. Tell Misha Izberigov the deal is done. Maya's blood turned to ice. Misha from the coast, it was a West Coast nickname, a name used by the syndicates in Los Angeles and Seattle. She pressed the transmit button on her radio, her voice a solid, cold whisper. Constantine, it's confirmed. That's Volkova's man. He sounds like New York, but she just used a West Coast call sign. Misha Izberigov. She's the bridge. She's connecting both coasts against you. A beat of silence. Then the main bay doors groaned, and a bank of industrial floodlights slammed on, drowning the warehouse floor in blinding white. Sarah and the New York man froze, hands raised against the glare. Constantine stepped out of the shadows, flanked by Lev. He was not rushing. He looked calm, as if he were walking into a boardroom. He ignored the Volkova man, who was already being quietly and efficiently disarmed by 2 other guards Maya had not even seen. Constantine's entire focus was on Sarah. He stopped 10 feet from her. The wind whipped his coat, but he stood like a statue. His face was pale, his eyes devoid of all emotion. How long? Sarah. His voice was quiet, yet it cut through the howl of the wind. Sarah did not flinch. She did not lie. She did not beg. She stared back at him, her face twisting into a mask of pure, cold defiance. The mask of the loyal chief of staff fell away, revealing the rot beneath. "Since you brought her in," she spat, gesturing contemptuously toward the dark office where Maya hid. "Since you stopped thinking. You were strong. You were ruthless. You were Murmansk. And then you looked at an American girl, a linguist, and you became weak." She took a step toward him, her voice rising with a zealot's fury. "You made an emotional choice. You put your faith in her instead of the organization. I do not trust your choices. I do not trust a leader who is led by his feelings." Konstantin listened, his expression unchanged. He had heard her confession. Judgment was passed. He did not raise his voice. He did not gesture. He simply looked past her, at Lev. "Lev," he said, his voice flat, "take her. Through the cold storage. She can wait for the next transport back to Europe." The order was sterile, clean, and utterly final. There was no torture, no theatrical violence. It was a logistics problem being solved. Cold storage and transport to Europe were just words. They meant she would cease to exist. Sarah's defiant expression finally cracked. She lunged, not at Konstantin, but in Maya's direction. A wordless scream of hatred. Lev caught her arm in a grip of iron, stopping her instantly. He began to march her out, her feet dragging for a moment before she regained her composure, her back straight even in her final exit. The aftermath was silent. The Volkova man was gone. The lights were off. It was just the drive back to the seafront residences, the city lights blurring past the tinted windows. Maya was shaking. The chill from the warehouse had settled deep in her bones. Sarah's words echoed in her head. "Since you brought her in." It was her fault. Her presence had been the catalyst. Her existence had fractured his organization, had forced this betrayal, had just signed a woman's death warrant. The weight of it, the cold reality of the world she was in, threatened to crush her. Konstantin's hand on her arm in the elevator was the only thing keeping her upright. He walked her to the door of her apartment. 2 guards were stationed in the hallway. He dismissed them with a single, sharp gesture. He followed her inside, closing the door. He did not turn on the main lights, leaving the apartment lit only by the vast, glittering expanse of the city below. He turned to her. He saw her pale face, her trembling hands. He knew exactly what she was thinking. He stepped forward, taking her by the shoulders. His grip was firm, grounding. "Look at me, Maya." She lifted her gaze, her eyes blurred with unshed tears of guilt and shock. "She made her choice long ago," he said, his voice low and absolute. "The weakness was hers, not mine. I chose you before she betrayed me. Her ambition was the problem, not your presence. Do not put this on yourself. Do you understand?" She nodded. A single, jerky movement. A tear escaped and traced a cold path down her cheek. He pulled her to him. It was not the desperate, hungry kiss from the night of the storm. It was a different kind of claiming. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her tight against his chest, one hand splayed across her back, the other cradling the back of her head, tucking her face against his neck. He was solid, warm, an anchor in the middle of her terror. He was shielding her from the images in her own head. He just held her, letting his strength seep into her, letting his steady heartbeat calm the panic in hers. After a long time, he spoke, his voice a low rumble against her ear. "We have one more thing to finish. This Volkova problem at the end of the line. We have to end it." He held her tighter. "After that, after it is done, if you want Boston, if you want to stay here, or if you want a house in St. Augustine, I can manage it. We will manage it." The storm was not just a storm. It was an accomplice. It descended on Harbor Light as a small, violent blizzard, a wet, heavy snow that choked the air and coated the docks in treacherous ice. Then, just after 8 o'clock, the lights in the port district went out. It was not a flicker. It was a sudden, heavy, absolute darkness. This was the night, the most important shipment of the month. It was not contraband, not weapons. It was leverage, hard drives, encrypted ledgers, and proof of payment evidence that the Volkova syndicate, not Konstantin, was the organization behind the human trafficking ring Eli had been investigating. It was the package Konstantin needed to dismantle his rival and clear his own name. Sarah had known the schedule. Therefore, Volkova knew the schedule. The blackout was tactical. The storm was cover. It was the perfect night for an assassination on the pier. Konstantin had been clear. After Sarah's betrayal, trust was a ruined currency. He was going himself. He trusted Lev to watch his back, and he trusted Maya to be his ears. She was not in the warehouse. She was in the armored, idling SUV, parked in the deep shadow of a loading crane. The vehicle was a steel cocoon, but it felt terrifyingly thin. She wore a high-tech headset, the receiver feeding her the comms chatter from the Volkova team. They were out there, in the dark, moving. The first sounds were not gunfire. They were the groan of metal and the sharp snap of cut cables. Then, the shouting. In Russian, "They are moving it, block the east gate," a voice barked. Maya's fingers flew on a secure laptop, translating. "Konstantin, they're on the east gate," she whispered into her own microphone, her voice steady. He and Lev were outside, shadows in the swirling snow. But the chatter was messy. She heard the clean, hard vowels of St. Petersburg, but they were mixed with a rougher, faster dialect, southern, near the Black Sea. "They have new allies," she reported, her heart hammering against her ribs. "They are not just Volkova's men. I hear at least 2 different accents." The world outside the reinforced windows erupted. She could not see the details, only muzzle flashes, brief and violent, illuminating the blizzard. She heard the sharp crack of gunfire, a sound that was immediately distinct from the heavy, metallic thud of rounds impacting the SUV's armor. The vehicle shuddered. She heard men screaming in Russian, the sound tinny through her headset. "Where is the translator? Get the girl, grab the girl, and we have him." A heavy weight slammed against her door, rocking the SUV, a scrape of metal. Someone was trying to pry the handle. A face, masked and grotesque, appeared at the window, centimeters from her own. He was shouting, but the ballistic glass muted him. He raised the butt of his rifle, preparing to smash it against the glass. Panic, cold and sharp, seized her, but it was the panic of a survivor. Not a victim. Her training, her linguistic instinct took over. She hit the external speaker button. She did not scream. She commanded. Her voice, flawless and authoritative, boomed out into the storm. "Odkodim oni odstupili ke tretiemu prichalu." "We're pulling back." They retreated to Pier 3. The man froze. His head snapped over his shoulder, confused by the sudden, conflicting order from a source he could not identify. That 1 second of hesitation was all it took. A dark shape. Lev moved in her peripheral vision, a blur of motion. The man disappeared from the window. There was a heavy, final thump against the side of the truck. She did not look. She closed her eyes and breathed. The gunfire outside tapered off. A terrible, ringing silence filled the void, broken only by the howl of the wind. Where was Konstantin? She could not hear him on her mic. Terror, cold and absolute, overwhelmed her training. She ripped off the headset. "Konstantin," she whispered. No reply. She clawed at the armored door's latch. It was protocol to stay inside. It was suicide to leave. She did not care. She pushed the heavy door open and tumbled out into the blizzard. The wind and snow hit her like a physical blow. "Konstantin," she screamed into the darkness, using his name in Russian. Konstantin. Her voice, carried by the storm, was a beacon. A sharp, whistling crack split the air. It was different from the other shots. It was high, precise, and followed by the zing of a ricochet off a nearby railing. A sniper on the rooftops, and she had just told him exactly where the valuable target was. A force like a freight train hit her from the side. It was Konstantin. He didn't just push her, he tackled her, his body a solid shield over hers. He drove her forward, his boots sliding on the ice. They crashed hard behind a massive, red shipping container. The impact knocked the breath from her lungs. She was pinned beneath him, the snow cold on her cheek, his body a heavy, warm and trembling weight. A second shot rang out, pinging off the steel container, inches above their heads. He pushed himself up, just an inch, his face close to hers, his breath coming in harsh, white clouds. He was staring at her, his eyes wild, his shoulder. She saw the dark patch spreading on his black coat. He was hit. He saw her staring at the wound. He ignored it. "Are you hit?" he demanded, his voice a low, desperate rasp. He was checking her first, his hands running over her arms, her chest, searching for an injury. "No," she gasped. "No, you're bleeding." "It is nothing," he growled. He looked at her. The adrenaline, the cold, the proximity, all coalescing into a single, unbearable point of tension. "If we live through tonight," he said, his voice ragged, "this thing between us, it is not pending. It is not a discussion for later." He dropped his forehead against hers, the snow swirling around them. "I am tired," he breathed, "tired of keeping my distance so you will not be scared." A third shot slammed into the container. They were pinned. "Whoa, we have to move," she whispered, her focus snapping back. "The comms. The sniper is on the roof of Warehouse 2. I heard them. The others are falling back toward the water." He nodded. The man from Murmansk taking over. He pulled his own radio. "Lev, Warehouse 2, rooftop. The rest of the team, west side. Cut them off at the water. Box them in." He looked at Maya, his eyes full of a new, fierce approval. "Good." They waited, their breath mingling in the frozen air. More shots, farther away this time. Then, finally, Lev's voice, calm and clear through Konstantin's radio. "Secure. The container is moving." In the far distance, sirens began to wail. The local police, conveniently stuck by the blackout, were on their way. Far too late. The immediate battle was over. The following morning, the sun was a pale, cold disk over the harbor. The snow had stopped, but the city looked bruised. Maya was in the same glass office overlooking the bay, where she had been interrogated what felt like a lifetime ago. Konstantin stood beside her, his left arm in a simple black sling, hidden perfectly by the cut of his dark suit jacket. The wound from the night before was a quiet, physical reminder of what they had survived. He was holding the hard drive they had recovered from the container. He inserted it into his laptop and turned the screen toward her. "You are not a catalyst, Maya. You are the target." He pressed play. It was grainy. Low-light footage from a security camera, timestamped 2 weeks ago. It showed the Volkova operative, Misha, in a New Jersey diner. Meeting with 2 other men, they were designing the false narrative. They were laughing as they invented the name Bureau of Transnational Integrity and the Coastal Economic Crime Investigation Bureau. They were outlining a plan to find a native-born, Russian-speaking asset inside Harbor Light, someone they could frame to bring the real federal agencies down on Konstantin, the weight of guilt that had settled on her, the feeling that she had caused Sarah's betrayal, that she had manipulated Eli evaporated. She had been a pawn, just like everyone else. Konstantin closed the laptop. "Your friend, the podcaster, Eli, I will have this file edited. Your name, your face, your existence will be erased from it. He will receive an anonymous copy." He looked at her, his gaze level. "He will have the biggest story of his career, but you will not be in it." It was a clean, surgical move. He was not just protecting himself, he was closing the door to her past. He was giving Eli a victory, but on his terms, ensuring Maya could never be pulled back into that old life. He then slid a heavy, leather-bound folder across the desk. "Your employment as my translator has been terminated." Maya's heart stopped. She looked at him, confused. "You are," he continued, tapping the folder. "As of this morning, a partner of record in the Baltic Meridian Group. Your official title is U.S. Cultural Advisor. There are incorporation papers, a non-disclosure agreement, and access codes to a private account." She opened the folder. It was all there, legal, binding and ironclad. She saw the salary, and it made her feel faint. But she understood the real meaning. This was not a job. It was an induction. This was his final golden cage. It meant that if he was arrested, if he was killed, if he disappeared, she and her mother were not just protected, They were legally entitled to a share of his legitimate assets. "It's very safe," she said quietly, her fingers tracing the embossed logo. "Very rich, and very difficult to leave." "Yes," he said simply. "This is the cage I am choosing," she affirmed, looking up at him. He moved closer then. The business part of the morning concluded. He stood in front of her, his good hand resting on the desk. "In this room," he said, his voice low. "When we first met, I used your stepmother. I used her illness as leverage to ensure your compliance." He looked away, out at the cold water. It was the first time she had ever seen him look uncomfortable. "That was the part of me from Murmansk, the part that sees only threats and assets. It is a difficult thing to unlearn." He turned back to her. "But I am learning." It was the apology she never knew she needed. It was the crack in the armor, the proof that the man was still inside the boss. She stood, closing the folder. She had to make her own terms clear. Not as an employee, not as a victim, but as his partner. "I don't need an easy life. Constantine. I grew up in Harbor Light. I've never had one." She stepped closer, into his space, forcing him to look down at her. "I just need to know that if the BTI kicks in that door, or if Volkova's men come back, you will not leave me behind to save yourself." A slow, genuine smile touched his mouth. It reached his eyes, turning them from gray-blue ice to the color of the sea. "When I arranged your stepmother's transfer to the pavilion," he said, "I put my name on her file. Not the Baltic Meridian Group, not the North Sea Fund, my personal name. I made myself her guarantor." He leaned down, his face just inches from hers. "There is no going back from that. They are tied to me. You are tied to me. We do not leave family behind." That was the vow. He closed the small distance between them. This kiss was not the desperate, rain-soaked collision on the pier. It was not the angry, possessive claiming in her apartment. This was a confirmation. It was slow and deep and absolute. His hand came up, lacing into her hair, tilting her head back. He pulled her flush against him, her back pressing into the hard wood of the filing cabinets. His warmth enveloped her, chasing away the last of the Harbor Light chill. He lifted his face just slightly, his eyes holding hers. A silent, burning declaration. He sealed the promise, his lips warm and sure, his control absolute. When they finally broke apart, she stayed resting against him, her head on his chest. They looked out the window together. The fog was lifting from the water, revealing the massive container ships moving out to sea on the new, secure routes that she had helped him clear. She was no longer the waitress serving them. She was the woman who owned the view. She had spoken Russian in front of a Mafia boss, and her life had changed in 5 minutes. Today, she still stood beside him, speaking Russian. But it was no longer to prove her worth, or to survive. It was to remind him that in a world as cold and hard as his, he owed her his warmth. His secure phone buzzed on the desk, a single text message. He read it, and she felt the tension in his chest release in a long, slow breath. "It is done," he said. "Volkova is pulling all his assets from the East Coast. The evidence from the hard drive has been delivered. He is running." A quiet settled in the room. The immediate war was over. They had won. They had a moment, a pause in the dangerous life he led. He turned her in his arms, his uninjured arm wrapping around her waist. A real smile, one of light and relief, touched his face. "St. Petersburg," he said, his voice almost light, "is much more beautiful than Harbor Light in the summer. Would you like to see it?" Maya smiled, leaning into his strength, her choice made, her cage chosen. "We go," she said. "But this time, no bodyguards in the room. Thank you so much for listening to this story. We would love to know where you are listening from, so please drop a comment below. Share your thoughts and let's talk. Please subscribe to my channel, Mafia Boss Stories, and like this video. It also helps so much if you hit that hype button, so this story can be heard by even more people.